In 1929, years of booming prosperity ended in catastrophe. It was the biggest stock market crash since records began.
It is impossible to underestimate the shock, a sense of stunned disbelief.
First-time investors borrowed huge amounts of money to speculate on the market.
The market broke very sharply, and a lot of people were wiped out with it. It was very painful.
Later, thousands of banks failed. Millions lost everything.
The poverty was really all around us. It was really, really pitiful.
The crash was followed by a depression that spread across the world, lasted for a decade, and was a prelude to war. This is the story of a financial disaster that we hoped would never happen again. Wednesday, 23rd of October, 1929. Without warning, share prices are plummeting on the New York Stock Exchange. Investors are stunned. For the last 5 years, the market has only gone up. In the space of an hour, a staggering 2.5 million shares are sold. The next day, the downward spiral continues.
As people came in to trade stocks on October 24th, there was a sense that maybe something had changed, that there was something different. All of a sudden, there just weren't buyers. People were willing to sell, but there weren't buyers coming forth to buy the stocks. And prices began to fall, $2, $4, $10 a share. It was sort of horrifying.
That morning, there were drops on the stock exchange. They were so sharp and so dire, stocks suddenly dropping 10, 20, 30 points at a time, that it's said that there were shrieks and gasps in the gallery of the New York Stock Exchange.
People are stunned by what is happening and terrified. Thousands of people begin to gather outside the stock market. 10,000 people. They fill the streets from Broadway to the East River.
People wanted to know what was going on. They went there. These huge crowds gathered around the stock exchange, around the statues and on the stairs, waiting to get any kind of news they could as people came out of the exchange. They could hear voices. They could actually hear the shouting and yelling as people were buying and selling. But they didn't know what was going on, and so they gathered and they stayed there to find out.
Few of the thousands waiting in the crowd appreciated the scale of the disaster that was about to unfold. Nor could they imagine that over the next 5 days, a financial catastrophe would sweep away the foundations of America's prosperity. But to understand what brought about the crash, we need to go back a decade, to a time when American confidence grew so high that it seemed the good times would last forever. In 1919, the US had emerged victorious from World War I. A mood of optimism was in the air. Britain and its European allies were exhausted financially from the war. But the US economy was thriving, and the world danced to the American tune.
The uncertainties were over. There seemed little doubt about what was going to happen. America was going on the greatest, gaudiest spree in history, and there was going to be plenty to tell about it.
In the 1920s, everyday life was changing. Electrification transformed America. Towns were hooked up to the grid. New technologies emerged. Airplanes, radios, domestic goods that had started life as luxuries now became necessities. The car industry also boomed as people flocked to buy one of the new Ford or Chrysler automobiles. An era of boundless prosperity seemed to have begun.
This is the flowering of consumer culture and mass consumption on a scale never before seen. There is also heavy installment buying to encourage people to buy big-ticket consumer items so that they can buy those items on credit.
This type of consumer credit was another innovation of the 1920s. For the first time, the idea of buy now, pay later hit the mainstream.
And there's a kind of play culture that develops alongside this consumerism, which says, we believe now in instant gratification. Take care of the now. Don't worry about the future. Live for the moment.
There was a whole ideology that we were in a new economic era, that it was the birthright of every self-respecting American to be rich.
With easy credit and more disposable income, Americans were now looking for new ways to get even richer. Since World War I, the US government had sold bonds, known as Liberty Bonds, to pay for the war. This was a way to borrow money from the public, who in turn would receive interest payments on the bond's value. Celebrities such as Charlie Chaplin and Douglas Fairbanks had been recruited to promote them at huge rallies.
Liberty bonds caused many people to become investors in securities for the first time. For the first time in their lives, they got interest payments every 6 months, and the security was something they could trade on the market, so they could look in the newspaper and see what the price of my bond is today.
Liberty bonds created an investing culture. Most people had never purchased securities before, and it got ordinary people accustomed to buying securities.
Now there was another group of people who thought they could take advantage of this new investing culture. The bankers of Wall Street. For years, Wall Street, the center of American finance, was made up of a small elite group of bankers doing business with each other in a society closed off to the general public. But one man saw an opportunity that would change the face of the financial world. Charles Mitchell, president of National City Bank, spotted a lucrative gap in the market.
Mitchell saw that investors had purchased a lot of government bonds during World War I. And so he said, now we have an investing public there, all we need to do is market other products like corporate bonds, common stocks, and just tell people these are respectable investments.
Mitchell was a natural salesman with a big ambition. If people were willing to buy bonds to raise capital for the government, surely they could be tempted to buy stocks and shares to raise capital for private companies listed on the New York Stock Exchange. And they could make a profit for themselves in the process.
Gradually, people who never dreamed that they would invest in stocks were doing so, and stocks lost a lot of the stigma. Historically, stocks had been considered much too risky for ordinary people. Whereas in the 1920s, there was a sense that investing in stocks was not only safe, but reliable and respectable.
The idea took off, and to exploit this lucrative new market, Mitchell opened brokerage offices all across the country, where people who had the money but not the investment know-how could speculate in stocks and shares.
This speculative frenzy embraced all kinds of people, not just professionals. Ordinary people began participating as well in unprecedented numbers all across the country, not just New York City, but in cities and small towns all across America. People were in love with the stock market.
Technology made it all possible. The latest share prices flashed from Wall Street could be printed out within minutes across America, using telegraphic ticker tape machines.
You could find ticker tape in nightclubs, in railroad depots, in beauty parlors, on ocean liners. The market became a pervasive part of America's play culture in the 1920s.
I eat, sleep, dream, talk stocks. The only way I believe to make money. It's exciting. I love it. $17,000 profit on $3,500 capital. Not bad.
There were wild speculations in all kinds of securities. Movie company stocks, aeronautical stocks, all the auto company stocks.
One of the hot stocks of the 1920s was Radio Corporation of America.